Welcome back, you guys, to Autism Live. I'm very excited because joining us via Skype and on the phone is the fabulous Bonnie Yates. She's a special education attorney with the law firm of Hirji and Chow in Culver City. We are very excited to have her with us because she sheds light on things that help us to wade through some of the special education things that we need to wade through, and that we need to know, you need to know your rights. Which is now what we're going to call this segment, Your Rights. So thrilled to have Bonnie here with us. And Bonnie, we always like to start with a disclaimer about you talking with us. So go ahead and hit that. And tell us about Hirji and Chow also.
Thank you. So Hirji and Chow is a 6-attorney law firm in Culver City, California that focuses on special education, regional center services, and disability discrimination. And our phone number, if you want to call us, if you're interested in a free consultation, is 310-391-0330. And this month is a good month for it because we seem to have had a little lull over the Christmas break, and things aren't going to get really crazy, I don't think, till February.
It's like the quiet before the storm, don't you think?
It is like that, exactly. and it's encouraging a lot of, huddling under blankets with hot tea by the fire, sort of girding our loins for the inevitable.
That's right. And so what's the disclaimer?
That we're not giving legal advice, that the answers to the questions are based on providing information about the law says, and it shouldn't be construed as advice because everyone's situation is specific, and I can't respond about your specific situation. So we encourage people to go to www.copa.net. That's a list of reputable attorneys who belong to the Council of Parent Attorneys and Advocates nationally. And the law is different in every state, so you need to talk to an attorney in your state.
There we go.
And that's a good place to start. I don't know all of those attorneys. I don't want it to sound as if I do, but the ones that I have met at the annual conference and whatnot seem to me to be committed and caring, and I think that there's a few components to picking a good lawyer for your case. We haven't really talked about that, but committed and caring is important, along with professionalism. But there also has to be legal skill. It's not enough that for example, I'm the parent of a child with a disability. I need to know what I'm doing.
Yeah.
Anyway, so that's our disclaimer.
Love it.
And today we are going to continue our discussion about reading. And part of the reason I wanted to do this kind of more extended discussion about reading is because I figured it was really incumbent upon me to read the state's most recent 2017 expression of how it thought we ought to be addressing dyslexia and other reading disabilities. And part of the reason I wanted to do that is that I have had a subpopulation of kids with autism diagnosis who also had difficulty learning how to read. And I also had a population of kids with autism as a diagnosis who did not have trouble learning how to read. However, the method by which they learned to read seemed different than sort of the phonics method that was taught to and was easily assimilated by my other children. So this has served its purpose. And if you do have concerns about reading comprehension, written expression, or whatever it is for your child, I think a lot of the issues that are raised in the dyslexia guidelines have broader applicability in terms of giving you subject areas of inquiry at your IEP team meeting when you are trying to get at what the district is doing as far as reading. And sometimes it's really not easy to tell, and sometimes it really feels like they're doing sort of a mishmash of things, and this stuff is really complex and needs to be handled in a straightforward and clinical manner by an experienced clinician, and I'm just not so sure that it is. And when you read about the mechanics and the processes in reading, in the dyslexia guidelines, you become aware why that is, because this stuff really is complicated, and that's why it's difficult. The approach that we have used has been changed around a million times, and I think that's because our understanding about reading has been incomplete. I think we're getting better. So anyway, last time we talked about the way that dyslexia and reading problems can manifest for students in high school and college. And I guess in order to be comprehensive about this, CDE also has a lengthy discussion in the dyslexia guidelines about other problems that are not dyslexia that look like reading problems. And they have an extensive discussion about English language learners. And those are kids who speak English, but it's not their first language and it's not the language spoken in their home. And it talks about how those kids have lots of difficulty in learning how to read for reasons other than that they have dyslexia. So there's a small population within that population of kids that have dyslexia. Most of those kids have sort of a lack of exposure to the English language, or they're learning how to read in English and they haven't mastered the language orally. So that causes problems. So anyway, that's kind of where our discussion picks up. And CDE, California Department of Education, has, there's a tension going on in the publication because what they're saying is so good and so strong and so right and so obvious, and yet these things are being discussed as guidelines, not as statewide mandated intervention plan for reading. So they say that this, problem of dyslexia is a neurological problem, and it involves, discrete differences in the brain, and it requires skilled teaching, and it requires research-based interventions, and it requires well-researched methods and knowledge about how to implement. And it requires the teaching of reading, oral language, written expression, and so on. These are complex tasks, and teachers need kind of pre-training before they actually start teaching. They need practicum, which is practicing the skills in a in vivo setting, and they need ongoing training. And by implication, I think we can assume that teachers are not getting this, and that's why there's not a lot of consistency as far as reading interventions, and there's not a lot of certainty about how to do the reading interventions. So common professional standards are required, and teachers need to be prepared to implement science-based and clinically proven practices. And that is straight out of the book, and it occurs to me that any parent who has questions about reading would be wanting to ask, are you teaching reading per common professional standards? If so, what are they? What is your scientifically based and clinically proven approach to reading? And I think you'll get some interesting answers. The book cites a 2010 publication. I'm not going to go into it, but it probably is very interesting. It's a link in the dyslexia guidelines, Knowledge and Practical Standards for Teachers of Reading. So we might want to start there. And we're told that the standards involve knowing how to teach oral and written language skills, phonics, word recognition, fluency, vocabulary, comprehension, written expression, handwriting, spelling, and so on. And people that assess kids need to be able to assess them in all of these areas using assessments that are scientifically valid methods of assessing kids. So on page 39, the dyslexia guidelines, there's a quote that I want to read you because I think it's important. There needs to be a commitment on the part of, I got to back up. If preschool teachers were given the opportunity to acquire basic foundational knowledge of English language structure, they would have the opportunity to develop expertise in individual interventions and implementation of instructional strategies during in-service staff development. Again, a critical element in the education of both pre-service and in-service teachers is the need for the opportunity to practice the acquired conceptual and foundational knowledge under supervised conditions. And then it goes on to talk about how you would create that. And so we just had a 6-day teacher strike, or whatever it was, after 30 years, and I didn't hear anything about reading. But you can see how reading and literacy really underlie all the problems, or many of the problems that we have in California. And there are complex reasons why we are 49th out of the 50 states. But we are, and so I think until we begin to teach people how to read, we're going to have an undereducated populace that's going to be at risk for not being able to support themselves and take care of their families and things like that. So the dyslexia guidelines then talks about how there has to be a village, that's my term, a village approach to how you do reading and reading intervention. And
Can I stop you for a second, Bonnie?
Yes.
I just want to go back to something you said about asking your teaching staff, what are you teaching with? Are you using best practices? Are you using science-based things? You've been in many more IEPs than all of us put together. How, if we, like, I think that's a wonderful thing to say, but I'm wondering how that is greeted, because we know that in a lot of cases they're not. Have you been in the room when a parent asks that, and what has been the reaction?
I feel like I haven't been asking enough questions about reading methods, but I have been at meetings where the district representative admitted that, I guess this was the principal of the elementary school, and she admitted she didn't know what reading method they were using. Can you imagine?
Oh, yeah. Yes, I can imagine.
I mean, that was honest. You know,
yeah.
She was being honest. But the way the state has conceptualized the approach to the problem, you have to have commitment on the part of the state universities to teaching teachers how to teach reading. So there has to be university support, and the university is kind of the repository of the studies and the knowledge about, you know, us getting better about how to teach reading.
Okay.
And then they talk about the role of teachers, speech and language specialists, and the psychologist. All educators need to be engaged in teaching reading, and they have to have pre-training and ongoing university-based training. And then they talk about the role of the speech and language pathologist is very critical in teaching the skills that you need to be able to read, and also the school psychologist. And the school psychologist is very important because the school psychologist is supposed to be knowledgeable about the kind of assessments that you need to give in order to probe whether or not the student is learning how to read, correctly. There's also a comment about paraprofessionals, and it says this area hasn't been studied a lot. We don't really have any research to tell us whether or not paraprofessionals can be effective in the teaching of reading, but if they are going to try to be, they need extensive research-based training. That's no surprise to any of us. I thought this was interesting too. School administrators, like the principal, are really pivotal in all of this. They quote a study that identified strong leadership as a significant trait in the successful schools of Florida's Reading First project. The elements identified in their study highlight the areas of focus for the preparation of school principals. They include deep knowledge of students and reading programs, the use of data, and addressing the needs of teachers. These elements should be a major focus of both pre-service and continuing in-service preparation of school principals. In other words, the principal is the instructional leader when it comes to reading instruction and reading interventions. So it would have been really cool if I'd had that paragraph with me or committed to memory, and could ask the principal, how do you compare your admitted amount of knowledge to what the state is saying the expectation should be? So I think that's very interesting. They're really emphasizing not only a top-down and a bottom-up, but they're emphasizing a universal screening program for kindergartners, whether or not they have dyslexia, because they think it can be identified in kindergarten if you use a universal screening tool for all the kids. And then you want to have the whole school kind of engaged in reading at whatever level they're engaged in it, so that it's part of the school culture, that everybody reads and that we're focused on reading and we're talking about books and we're thinking about words and we're thinking about language, so that rather than it being some sort of medicine that you have to take, hopefully it can be something that's, stimulating and interesting, and if it's not too hard, it can be pleasurable. So I've already talked about California's difficulties, and that there's this achievement gap between the dyslexic non-readers and the readers. It's noticeable as early as first grade, and it will continue. That's the thing that everybody needs to understand. People are not going to grow out of this. And dyslexia has different presentations depending on the person, their age, and the severity of their presentation. And that's why you want to start with the universal screening for everyone's, because it doesn't cost very much. And it can save a lot, because what happens is if you identify somebody in kindergarten and you give them appropriate literacy support, what you're heading off a few years down the line is severe anxiety and emotional problems that are very common in people who can't learn how to read.
I just want to stop and go over that again, that for people just tuning in, and you're talking about the standards for dyslexia, but you said in the beginning, we're talking about this because a lot of our kids have reading comprehension problems. And
Yes.
and I don't think that very many people have said to autism parents that you should have just exactly what you just said there. So I want to go back over it, Bonnie. You should have your child screened for reading issues, because there are people who have dyslexia and autism, or other issues that can be addressed in terms of reading comprehension. And if you don't address these issues, it's a pipeline to anxiety.
Right, and other emotional problems. Because people get depressed when they try something over and over again and they give it their best effort and they fail, and that's what dyslexia is like. I also don't know the answer. I don't know if you do, Shannon, or Doreen would, or someone at Card would. But even for the kids that don't have difficulty learning how to read, the children with autism, does the fact that they don't decode or sound out words, does that have an effect on their language fluency later? So there might be reasons to beef up. Yeah, there would be reasons to beef up their reading support for other reasons then.
And I also want to point out, no one said it to me. No one said, you should have your child looked at for reading issues. But it wasn't until my child was 8 or 9 that someone said you should take him to a developmental ophthalmologist and make sure that his eye movement is not hindered, and it was. And
right, and you could see how that's a really big problem in reading. Even if you get the content, we know that students that have vision difficulties get so fatigued in the classroom and they rely so much on auditory comprehension that if they miss class, they fall very far behind, because they miss the oral instruction. Anyway, so the universal screener would be for kindergartners. It would look at phonics, letters, numbers, sound symbol correspondence, decoding, sight reading, rapid naming, which is, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, spelling, comprehension, fluency, handwriting, written expression, and so on. And the other thing we haven't really touched on, and I'm not suggesting that I'm going to now, because I don't know what I would say about it. It's something I need to look into. Is we all have seen lots of examples of the loopy, messy, big writing that many children with autism have when they do their written expression work. And I've heard that explained as kind of a lack of focus on the writing. I've heard it explained as a hiccup between the brain and the hand. But in addition to actually the content of the written expression, the mechanics of writing may give us some clues about what's not going right with the reading. I don't know. You know, that's normally seen as the purview of occupational therapy.
But
it
but
seems
I
to
can
me
tell
that-
you that in our instance, that my son's very bad handwriting was directly related to his vision problem, which was addressed when we had a screening. So I think the takeaway is get the screening and you'll find all this stuff out.
Yeah, right. And you know, it's scary to get a screening or any other diagnostic test, but you got to do it. You know.
Yeah.
Now, people hear the term RTI, I think, in their IEPs, in their reading about IEPs. RTI means response to intervention. And there is a suggestion in the law that the state should be using interventions that are research based and that demonstrate that when these were used upon students, they responded to the intervention. However, the state law also said to the greatest extent practical, which makes me crazy because we all know that means that it's not going to happen. But anyway, the Department of Education decided to call it not only response to intervention, but response to intervention and instruction. And they say a systematic, data-driven approach that benefits every student is required. And on page 46, and I really do hope that some of you are going to have printed out and looked at the dyslexia guidelines, because I think they're quite comprehensive. They have an interesting little Venn diagram that basically kind of summarizes all this. So response to intervention now includes the word instruction in order to emphasize the full spectrum of instruction from general to intensive. Response to instruction and intervention is defined as a systematic, data-driven approach to instruction that benefits every student. RTI integrates resources from general education and special education through a comprehensive system of core instruction and tiered levels of intervention to benefit every student. So are we out of time?
We are officially out of time. I hate
Okay.
that, but we are. It's the truth.
Okay. We
So
got to page 46. We're doing really well. We are going to finish this sucker.
we're kicking this.
Exactly.
Fabulous. And I just want to reiterate again, it's important because we're seeing guidelines for teaching something that our kids likely need to have. And these are things that we can then go into the IEP and have it help us, correct me if I'm wrong, Bonnie, but help us guide us in some of the things that we might be asking for our students.
Don't we want to know what the method is that's being used at school to teach our student, our child, how to read?
Absolutely.
I mean, the dyslexia guidelines will give you the information you need to ask the questions that you're entitled to ask at the IEP. And if they say, well, we can't answer those because we don't have the reading specialist here, that's a denial of parental participation. So you should insist that you get the answers. You know, everyone has a cell phone these days. Even if the reading instruction person cannot come in, she should be available by telephone.
I love it when you throw these things at us, though, that give us the keys to the kingdom. Saying that's a denial of parental participation. We all need to write that down somewhere. So that because a lot of times, Bonnie, we ask them questions like, but, you know, what are you using to do this? And they find ways to put us off. And to respond to that and say, that's a denial of parental participation, I want to crochet that onto a pillow.
Okay, well, the pillow that we're going to crochet is next week. We're going to also talk about parental participation and prior written notice. Okay. Because there are very few topics that they really don't have to answer to you on.
Okay. I love that. That's helping us knowing our rights. So
okay, excellent.
It's a fabulous
Very
thing.
good, Shannon.
Thank you so much, Bonnie. Tell us again.
Next week.
Yes, tell us how we reach Hirji and Chow.
Okay, so read my lips. They say, send me your questions. Hirji and Chow, 310-391-0330. Hope to talk to you, some of you soon.
And thank you. Also, the website is Lawyer for Children. So wonderful. All right, we're going to a break. Bonnie, stay 1 second, but we're going to a break.
Okay.
And we'll be back. We've got surfers coming in. They're from A Walk on Water. So stick with us.